Well, thanks, Stefan, and everyone for attending. Today, we're going to talk about malting barley. So my name is Jerry Clark. I'm an agriculture educator based out of Chippewa, Dunn, and Eau Claire counties. Main office is here in Chippewa Falls. And then, Carl, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, Carl Duley. I'm in Buffalo County, right along the Mississippi River.
So today on the Lunch and Learn, we're going to tackle malting barley and just talk briefly about some of the different projects we've done over the last 10 to 12 years, I guess, and show you some data from some projects and some resources that you might have. And if you got any questions, we'll address them. Or I can't see the chat box from here, but if there's a
I got her,
question,
Jerry.
if anybody wants to blurt something out, tell me to stop talking and we'll discuss. That's how we learn more, I think, a little bit better in these situations. So we'll get started here. So I guess a big question for those say, why do we research malting barley here in Wisconsin? Well, for me personally, hopefully this works. There's the Leinenkugel Brewery, there's the Leinie Lodge, and there's my office. So for me, it hits pretty close to home to have to work on something related to beer, because I can just walk about a block and be at the lodge and have some happy hour if I need to. So some of our background as well was the craft brewing industry taking off. And Carl was kind of the leader, him and a former county agent down in Vernon County, Tim Rabine. They identified that need, that we've got this growing, burgeoning craft brewing industry, and there was a need for some local ingredients. Early on, they had to buy every barley and hops from out of state for the most part. And we identified that as something that we could probably identify or do some research with, get farmers maybe excited about growing malting barley, simply because there's a demand for it to be grown locally. And as most of you know, that craft brewing industry just exploded over the last 15 years or so, where we've, just shy of 10,000 craft breweries in the U.S. based from the American Brewers Association. So again, still growing. I think there's been some transition in that industry, with some folks getting into the industry, some out, but for the most part, it really grew over these last 15 years. So that was kind of our driving point behind trying to investigate some of the malting barley part of it. And you'll see down the road, we kind of looked at how do we produce this from a profitability standpoint? That's what every farmer's interested in, but also something that can be environmentally good for our cropping systems. So where does malting barley fit in it? And in the discussion today, we're going to also talk not just, a lot of us think of barley as a spring small grain crop, but it's actually winter barley is one that we're working on a little bit more intensively here, just to see how it fits in a cropping rotation. Farmers are interested in cover crops. Well, here's a cover crop that could actually not just be for holding erosion or using it as a forage, or what some of the other crops are for, cover crops are for, but this is a small grain crop that can be taken to small grain harvest. And then if the quality is there and managed correctly, then we have another, we've used it as a cover crop, but we've also have a valuable crop at the end. So most of our work looked at investigating the variety selection. So we've looked at a number of varieties over these last 12 to 15 years, whatever it's been. And then nitrogen application rates and fungicide application as well. Those seem to be the two major inputs to have quality malting barley produced. And like I said, we wanted to introduce something different into the current cropping system, and how it fits possibly after planting of a soybean crop, or used as a cover crop with a planting after corn silage or something like that. So another purpose for some of our research is we've seen our geography change a little bit over the landscape change, where we've here in northwestern Wisconsin, we've seen that change from primarily a dairy production region to kind of that cash grain, corn silage, soybean type of change. And so we've seen the cropping systems change where alfalfa's kind of been taken out into more of a row crop system, as we've seen across much of Wisconsin. So again, it thought about, can we introduce a potential new crop to this, to a cropping system? And again, how winter barley maybe fits into that system, from a cover, not just a cover crop, but using that as an actual third crop in that system, which we've seen from a soybean production standpoint help break up a disease cycle, or it helps with that rotation effect with any of our crops. So if we can introduce that third crop into our system, overall, can we introduce something that's a little bit healthier from a cropping system standpoint? And then again, with the malting beer industry, they don't accept the GMO barley part of it. So this is one that we still have to manage from a weed management standpoint and some of those types of things where there's specific inputs that we may need to do for this industry. So that's
Jim, if I can mention,
oh, sure.
If I can mention one other thing under the whole GMO issue is that because of that, it takes a lot longer to try to build traits into new varieties, especially disease resistance, and it's, I'm not going to say holding back the industry, but people expect you can pop in a trait like you can with corn and soybeans and wheat, and you just can't do that with barley. You have to go through the traditional selection and grow up processes. So to get a new barley out there, malting barley, it's about a 10-year process from when you first identify to you get one on the market.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Carl. Move on to our next. So this is what our variety trial, or not just our variety trials, but what our trials look like from the air. And so we've got, like I said, we've done, we do the small replicated or small randomized complete block design with 4 replications. That's typically what we shoot for. So we have some statistically sound data following at harvest, or as we do any type of measurements. We usually do some lodging scores. We also look at head scab or fusarium infection rates, those kind of things. So this kind of gives you an idea of what our research blocks look like. And I don't know, Carl, do you want to explain the green blocks out there at all?
Yeah, we had there's not a lot of herbicide available for late summer grasses like yellow foxtail, and so I went around all the plots and sprayed with Roundup. Got to be really careful not to get them on the barley, because that's a big no-no in the industry to have any Roundup residue, and it reduces germination drastically of the seed, which we got to keep it a live seed. And it was about 95 degrees that Sunday when I was spraying, and I missed a couple blocks. We just told all the producers that we wanted to prove that we did have a weed bank out there and that we dealt with it. That was the excuse I gave.
So then from a variety trial standpoint, and I just grabbed since 2012, we've looked at over 60 to 70 spring and winter varieties, depending on the year and availability. We've got pretty good connections with Oregon State, North Dakota State breeding programs. And so they're always willing to send us some of the newer varieties that maybe they're working on or that are being released for research purposes, those kind of things. Cornell University has been another one, and also some private industry that would like to put a variety in as well. So this is kind of just a result of the 2020 variety trial, where you can see the number of different varieties we looked at maybe specifically this year, and then try to run some statistics on it just to look at it from a yield standpoint. And what we typically try to do is hand select a few of these if we have funding, to try to do some quality grain testing as well for protein and some of those components that the brewing industry is looking for. In most years, the quality part, we can hit that pretty well. We try to, and that you'll see that with our nitrogen trial results, trying to keep that protein level low enough, getting enough nitrogen on it to get a decent yield, but not jacking up that protein level so high that it causes trouble with quality. But overall, we've usually seen some type of differences within the varieties, and so it's always kind of nice to run these each year just to see where the industry's headed. And those partners that we have at other universities are pretty thankful for having our trials here, just to give them a different geographic region that they can get some comparison of how their varieties are doing.
Jerry, can I mention one thing on here? The Cornell, the CU31 is now, it's kind of fun. It's now a name variety. It's on the AMBA, the American Malting Barley Association approved list. It's called Excelsior Gold now. We're kind of excited about it because it tends to have lower Fusarium head blight infection rates. It also has yielded pretty well. Last year it was in the top couple that we had. And then I also want to mention, unless Jerry, you're going to do this later, about Full Pint. Full Pint's a cool little variety from Oregon that they bred. It's got great malting characteristics. Unfortunately, it suffers big time from pre-sprout, and even if you don't have rain, you get pre-sprout with Full Pint, but it's always yielded really well. And Oregon doesn't deal with head scab basically because they don't grow corn there, and corn's kind of our major incubator for the head scab. And Full Pint actually has some natural resistance to head scab, but unfortunately, if you don't malt it like within a month of harvest, the sprout rate drops way off, and we haven't given up on it because it's a great, as Jerry told me, it's a great conversation piece because it only gets about a foot, maybe a foot and a half tall, and it yields well, and but just not going to be practical because of malting characteristics.
So we usually don't have lodging issues with Full Pint. So
yeah.
When you have a field day, everybody wants to know what happened, because they think something happened to that block and it's actually the variety. So it's kind of neat. So I don't know, Carl, I'll turn it over to you for a little bit, talk about your winter barley work. And
yeah, we've been able to participate. Kevin Smith, the barley and oat breeder from from University of Minnesota, has been great with running a trial. I think there's been around 14 states, and I think we've been in it every year on winter barleys. I know it's at least 12 years that we've had it at least one location in Western Wisconsin. And just a couple of things, why excitement over winter barley. It does fit our rotations a lot better. If we get our soybeans off early, we can follow with winter barley. We need to get them planted right around October 1st. A week either side of October 1st is what the target date is. So if we can get beans off early, we have planted into corn silage fields pretty often. Most of the years in Buffalo County, that's where it went in, because we get our corn silage off early enough. We've grown it no-till just about every year with quite a bit of success. It's a green growing crop on the landscape for more of the year. That's another reason we're pretty excited about it. Jerry mentioned before, could be considered a cover crop, which I guess they do talk about a little bit later. We harvested early. So Minnesota is really working on short season varieties of winter barley because they're looking at, especially in southern Minnesota, could work in southern Wisconsin as a double crop with soybeans. You get them planted in by July 1st. I'm thinking, and Jerry, we haven't even talked about this, but this could be a good fit with a double crop with hemp fiber. We can plant that in pretty late and still get really pretty decent yields. And so I think there is some real potential there. And the winter hardiness has gotten a lot better on winter barley the last 2 or 3 years now. You can grow it as an can grow an emergency forage if you need to after the barley, winter barley, because it comes off so early, or you can really get a quality cover crop put in too, because you can plant it for sure in August and early September. It does have a lower incidence of Fusarium head blight which produces Don. And because it sheds pollen many years before the Fusarium head blight is active in the environment, and that's the only time that the heads can be infected by Fusarium is during pollination. It also tends to yield better than spring barley. not too unusual to have 100+ bushel yields, and we really, to compete with other crops such as corn and soybeans, we really need to be up around that 75, 80 bushel rate to be able to compete economically. Okay, Jerry. This is a plot from a couple of years ago. On the right-hand side, were our winter barley trials. We had 27 varieties that year, replicated 3 times because we're really limited on seed. Most of these are numbered varieties and haven't gone through seed reproduction yet. We measure winter hardiness. This year, pretty much everything but 2, I think, varieties did well through the winter, which unfortunately you don't learn a lot when they all survive of what's winter hardy. We measured yields. All varieties were over 80 bushel that year. I think if I remember right, we were up about 130 with some of the top varieties, so it did well. They were micro malted by both by the USDA Cereal Grain Lab in Madison and this year, and they were also micro malted by Roar Malt, and to just weed out a little bit more of which varieties can be used for malting barley. On the left-hand side, it's kind of an ugly looking plot. It was if you're familiar with the Vavilanoff lab and seed bank in Russia, another researcher we worked with, Brian Stephenson, was able to secure, it was 300, it was almost, I think 700 varieties when he first started. He was able to get 4 or 5 seeds of each variety, which up at U of M, they grew out in the greenhouse, and then they put in 1 year up at Minnesota at St. Paul campus to see winter hard. These were all winter barleys that were collected back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, I participated the second year down in Buffalo County. We got enough seed to plant 4 foot or a single 4 foot row of each line. We replicated them 3 times, I believe. Pretty much everything was winter hardy, and that was pretty much the only concern that there was, is what varieties are going to be winter hardy. We tried to gather enough seed to see if we could get enough to malt, but there really wasn't enough seed there to run any kind of malting trial. So that part of it was kind of a bust, but quite a few of these varieties have now been used to increase the winter hardiness in the winter barley trials. It's been long enough that they've been able to crossbreed some of these and increasing the winter hardiness. Brian told me that they're pretty sure that we can count on winter barley making it through our winters 7 out of 8 years rather than 2 out of 8 years where we were before. Just a little bit about Vavilanoff, if you haven't read Vaviloff, if you haven't read anything about him. He realized genetic diversity was really found around 8 regions around the world in the early 1900s, and he also recognized, even at that time, the genetic erosion, where we were concentrating on 4 or 5 key parent plants in the corn industry to produce pretty much all of our varieties, and that was a big concern. And if you have a chance, pop online, or there's a few books that talk about the history. I won't go into it here, but it's pretty fascinating about what they did and what he did. He wasn't the nicest guy in the world, both ethically and morally towards people, but about crop production and the environment, he was very, very much a world leader. This was the first trial we ever grew in Buffalo County, and I think, Jerry, you were actually down to the field day, weren't you? That we did.
Yep, I was there.
And we only had like 4 or 5 varieties. And on the left is Brian Stephenson. He's the plant pathologist in cereal grains at University of Minnesota. On the right is Kevin Smith, and Kevin's been the breeder there for a little over 20 years now at the University of Minnesota. They came down. They were pretty excited to have another location in the Midwest outside of the the dry areas of North Dakota and western Minnesota to look at barley. Jerry mentioned his location to breweries, to Leinenkugels in the first or second slide. One of the reasons we got pretty excited is Buffalo County was a huge malting barley area up until about the 1930s or so. We have Freighter Malt was in Winona, Minnesota, directly across the Mississippi from Buffalo County, and it's now owned by Malt Europe, owns it now. Still operating. None of their barley comes from Wisconsin or Minnesota. It's Canada, North Dakota, Montana. And Roar Malt, which is in about less than 100 miles from us in Shakopee, Minnesota, has been a great cooperator with us on all of our trials, and because they would like to see more and cut down on transportation for malting barley, basically. So wanted to give them a little kudos on that. We've also cooperated quite a bit with the University of Minnesota master and PhD students on some of their trials. We did a field day a few years ago, and I guess we got proof. Jerry was at that one. This was down in Buffalo County, and they gave there was 2 trials that we helped them out with that year, growing in a second location outside of the St. Paul campus, and we have a small group down in Buffalo County called the Buffalo County Barley Society, just trying to move forward with barley at the time. Now they've kind of expanded into other small grains, but they came down and provided what their projects were working on and what we were helping them out with. This is this example of one of the trials. Farmers have been incredible about letting us use land. This was in the rest of the field is rye, winter rye. This was a field of looking at that time, they were all 6 rows, but they were feral or wild strains of barley being bred first generation into more traditional varieties. It was a pretty cool study. It was also, this was a PhD student study, and it was actually the first time he ever put a barley seed into the ground, because I can't plant alone, so he had to come down and help me. So I told him it was about time that he actually planted something. So it was a pretty cool. Unfortunately, it was 6-row barley, so all of that has been set aside because the industry doesn't really accept 6-row barley anymore. They've all moved to 2-row barley.
Carl, can you explain what the reason for that why 2-row is kind of preferred?
Oh, it's got a little better diastolic pressure. It's easier to malt, basically. You can also, it does better, 2-row does better with all malt beers than if you're using adjuvants adjuncts like corn or rice, then 6-row used to work better. 2-row tend to be a little plumper, so you get a little better plumpness score. Those were kind of the big reasons. Some of the brewers say we were just fine with 6-row, and 2-row is all they grew out west. So that's kind of the big move, was driven by the major barley areas, not by the Midwest here. We also have had built some great relationships. Jerry mentioned quite a few of the universities that we've worked with. We've also built a great relationship with Roar Malt. Bort Malt has also contacted us. They would like to look at where we can partner with them. That's probably a surprise to Jerry, because I just got that email yesterday. And then also with some of the brewers, some of you may recognize Dan Carey stopped by at one of our field days a few years ago from New Glarus Brewing. We had a stretch of 3 years where all of the New Glarus beers had 15% of their malt that came from Buffalo County. Unfortunately, then we hit 3 years where we couldn't meet the DON standard. And so all of our growers have put it on hold for right now and are waiting for varieties or methods or production methods or ways that we can be more assured that we can produce quality malt that'll meet the DON standard. We also, this was just a 1-year, it wasn't replicated. It was just something that we did, but it is receiving some traction. Southern Minnesota, northern Iowa is relay planting, where we actually left every 30 inches. We would leave out one row of barley, and we came back in and seeded, put in soybeans, so that you could harvest the barley and then come in and harvest the soybeans. It was kind of cool. All right, there we go. Stefan, I must be talking too long. Stefan's cutting me off, but we planted the soybeans too early. We learned that we did give up a fair amount of yield on the soybeans. The barley we gave up probably 10% is all we gave up. But you can't really use the straw, and which is a valuable commodity. There may be some real potential for this, but with my volunteer farmer pulling off the rows on the coulters on our no-till drill, and trying to put them back on, he said 1 year was enough of that till we can let others do that research, because it was pretty much a day getting it ready and a day getting it put back together again. So I only can ask these volunteers so much. So. All right, Jerry, you go for it.
All right. So a couple of the things we've done then are the fungicide application study and a nitrogen application study. And it's basically to, determine effectiveness against Fusarium head blight, or head scab, as some folks call it. So this is, we over the years, we've looked at a number of different products, things like that, you'll see in a minute. So then the other study was the nitrogen application study, where we looked at, the reason for that was the issues with ground nitrate getting to groundwater, especially here in Chippewa County. And then we looked at different ranges of application from, I should have put 0 on here because we always have a check, but then look at different nitrogen rates. But this is kind of where the application range is based on, A2809, which is our Wisconsin soils fertility recommendations. But so most of the time we followed soybeans. We did some testing for grain protein and some of those other quality parameters. And then another item that we used was the green seeker, which is, a reflective monitoring system, basically to look at greenness of the plant and correlating that to kind of the results of the applications themselves. And so that was one way we could help drive, just another way to kind of document what was happening with the plots themselves. So again, it was between the two studies, it was to determine yield and some economic impact. Is this a sustainable production practices? Because we know with the fungicide application, we need to look at, we got to control head scab or it's an unmarketable product. And then with nitrogen, trying to find that sweet spot where we get production without having too high protein levels. So again, this was our little planter that we've used, little 4-foot Higgy planter. And then we had these locations here in Chippewa Falls and in Buffalo County, depending where Carl was at, kind of ranged from Alma up into the, was that closer to Independence?
Independence, yep.
A little bit closer over here. So my sites were generally right in the Chippewa Falls area, just about where that blue star is. So we did do that randomized complete block design, the 4 replications. And again, Carl and his societies have pulled together some of our equipment. So we've been able to do this small block research trials. So we'll look at the nitrogen rate study first here. And again, we did that over 3 years, just wrapped it up a few years back. I looked at 4 application rates, basically straight urea. We didn't have a treated product or a slow release product. And we tried to apply that right at tillering. So just as those plants were starting to bolt upward, we started to put those on. And then we looked at different varieties, depending what we had for that year. So we didn't look at all 5 of these in 1 year. Some years we had a couple different varieties. Some years we just did one. I think on 1 year we couldn't, Carl's data wasn't jiving real well. So this, 2019, but 2020 and 2018 in Buffalo County, you could see where those year to year. That's why you replicate these over several years. And so you could see that 90-pound rate, 60 to 90 pounds was typically a little bit better statistically. And then in 2018, you looked at the 30-pound rate being a little bit better, especially with a Conlon variety. And so we were seeing differences just based on, in some treatments, just based on variety differences. So again, kind of just told us, well, we know we got to have some nitrogen on it depending on the variety, but then do we really need as much as, that higher rate? So then in Chippewa County, kind of similar things. And in 2020, we only looked at one variety, but really not a difference in any of these. I should back up just a second. The Buffalo County site was always a little heavier soil, silt loam. Chippewa County is much sandier. It's a Scott Lake sandy soil. So then a Scott Lake sandy loam, let me put it that way. So again, some of these rates didn't show any difference in yield. In 2019, we start to see a little bit of an increase when we look at certain varieties. And then 2020, not a lot of difference. It seemed like somewhere in that 30-pound range, some nitrogen was definitely needed depending on the variety. So then the fungicide application study, this we always looked at we worked pretty closely with Dr. Damon Smith, who's the plant pathologist at UW-Madison. And we looked at these, depending on the products that we had available, were the ones that we would use. And so we would replicate these again, the 4 treatments using a single variety. Always had something where we didn't do any treatment. The only thing it received was nitrogen fertilizer, or just the nutrient plan. But then we would look at a specific product depending on what was needed. And so we look at right at heading, we would put on a product like Approach. So again, trying to protect that flag leaf, so we would get decent yield protection. But then we also came back with a couple different products a few weeks after heading, or it was maybe just a week after heading for the most part. But just as that head was starting to come out, that's when we would start to apply either the Prosaro, Miravis Ace, whatever product we had, to kind of look at protection against Don. So again, this one was more of that vegetative protection, and here we were looking at more of that grain protection with those products.
Jerry, can I just mention that we really had to do some education with the farmers, because if you're familiar with wheat, wheat sheds pollen after the head's totally emerged, where barley actually sheds pollen. It'll start shedding pollen actually in the sheath yet. So you only have like about 3 days if you have good growing conditions to get that protection for Fusarium head blight on. It's a real challenge. If you get a rain shower or a rain event, you may have lost your timing. Miravis Ace is one that we're hopefully it's going to work a little better. We didn't really see the results in our trial, but they have in the winter wheat trials, because there is some systemic activity with Miravis Ace with Fusarium head blight. I don't know that we've really seen that yet, but over time, or hopefully we will.
Mm-hmm. So this is a typical program that is recommended just for those management for yield and that head blight. 2019, again, we just used the Approach and the Prosaro, kind of same type of application, like Carl said, immediately right as that head is emerging. And then in 2020, we got into it a little bit deeper. This was a seed treatment product. And so we had 5 different treatments where we, again, had nothing applied, but then the seed treatment alone, the seed treatment, again, with that vegetative protection, with nothing to protect the seed, the heading at heading. And then the seed treatment, again, with that vegetative application, and then 2 different products down here, again, the Prosaro and Miravis Ace, just to see if there's a difference detected within those products. So here's what happened in 2018 then when we looked at, and what I did here was kind of just try to block out where a majority of that higher rates were at, or higher yields. So again, looking at yield, and then the head scab infection that would create DON in the testing. And so in Buffalo County, we tended to see a little bit higher yields, but then we always needed that treatment with Pinnacle. So again, an older variety, so that we saw that the treatments typically worked pretty well within those, having at least that vegetative treatment as well as that grain treatment. With the robust variety, again, if you want to look at it within the variety, you'd have to look at the letters within that variety itself to see if there was a difference with any treatments. But there again, anytime we had those vegetative and grain head scab protection, seemed to do a little bit better. So at a minimum, we always needed that at least some protection on the vegetative side of things. Similar with Odyssey down here. And in Chippewa County, we also saw some of those better yielding treatments being those that had the two applications. So in 2018, kind of realized from the start of that first year data that there was an effect with the treatment. In 2019, a combination of data here. You could definitely see the yield difference with, again, four different varieties we looked at this year, but you saw the higher yields down here with ACC Connect, but nonetheless, you saw a better yield with the treatments that had at least that the vegetative treatment with those with a head scab treatment. Full pint, again, one that's pretty short, and so got hammered pretty hard if there was no treatment to it. But we typically saw within these two varieties, as well as Explorer didn't have much of a difference, but these two varieties showed a little bit more of a difference with the treatments. And then the last year in 2020, this is where we saw, again, in Buffalo County, those treatments did the best here with that. The seed treatment seemed to, or all three treatments yielded a little bit better than the average. And then Explorer just in general was like Carl said, is one of the newer variety coming out that tends to have a little more head scab resistance from that standpoint, and produced very well in Buffalo County. We did not test it in Chippewa County that year, but we had such a range in we didn't really see a statistical difference, even though we saw this huge difference in yield because of our replicated design. We saw a huge difference within each block. And so it was pretty hard to pull out any statistical difference. Wanted to show it anyway, because that just shows the range of yield, but from a statistics standpoint within the blocks themselves, there was such a range that we couldn't pull out the statistical difference. So Carl's data definitely showed a little bit better difference with those three varieties. And so then on the economic return side of things, when we looked at it from the nitrogen application, one thing that was interesting was down here, we only saw the best return. And this was basically looking at the nitrogen study itself, where we used the same fungicide treatment program. We only saw that high nitrogen rate really produce the best economic turn once. We usually saw the sweet spot somewhere between 30 and 60 pounds across most of these years in locations. So the summary then for this was, we typically figured about a minimum of 30 pounds of nitrogen was needed to statistically increase that yield. So we know that only 90 pounds was probably a little too much. And I'll remember, we're coming off of soybean stubble in all of these, or soybean residue. And so there could be a slight credit there. We didn't do nitrate tests to see what we had available going into this study. but there could be maybe upwards of 20 pounds, especially in Carl's location, possibly that was there for nitrogen credit. But for the most part, we saw that 90-pound rate is about what was only economically available once. That actually resulted in the best economic return. So we knew that's with 3 years at 2 locations, we saw 30 to 60 pounds somewhere in there typically was the best application rate. So then on fungicide application, usually that application at heading and or at flowering, one of those two was needed to increase the yield compared to that non-treated check. The only time it really didn't turn out was in 2020, and that probably had to do with the blocks themselves not having that difference in them. So in general, then, as we wrap up here, our outreach, we've got all of these fact sheets available at the 2 websites. I think as we move towards Stefan has the topic hub, the emerging crops website available, and we move towards the crops and soils program topic hub with our Madison extension website. This is probably where most of that information will get housed down the road. But if you're looking for some of the fact sheets and things from each individual year, we have those listed at our websites there. The nitrogen application study and the fungicide application study was published in a journal of the National Association of County Agricultural Agents. So that journal article is there as well. And so then, so what? All right, we've done this program and we've got outreach and all those kind of things. But we saw farmers reducing their nitrogen rates. That was one thing this study has shown. Those that are interested in growing malting barley, they're accepting these recommendations. They're probably going at that 30 to 60 rate, depending on their crop rotation or depending on some of the historical, the field history of those fields. And they're applying at least that one fungicide application. So like Carl said earlier, there was some education involved that you needed to have that fungicide protection out there in order to hit that quality to avoid having an unmarketable product for the head scab or the Don that would show up as a vomitoxin. And so that has shown that those that we've worked with or have contacted us interested in growing malting barley, we've been able to use this data to say, here's kind of where we're at. You may want to check with your own field, your own production history to see from a nitrogen rate what you want to use. But the recommendation is to at least use that one fungicide application, primarily at head scab protection to make sure that quality may be met. We've had a local co-op here in Chippewa County start contracting for malting barley. They were looking for just one specific variety at the time. And so they were contracting as many acres as people were interested in. And so, again, when corn and soybeans start to hit record high yields, you typically see any alternative crop or secondary crop kind of take a backseat to corn and soy. But for those years when there's kind of high or a very thin margin, maybe something new, they want to try to break up a rotation. Malting barley can be that example. Looking at probably around 2,000 new acres being planted across the state as far as growers interested in trying something new. So just some of our informal contacts and informal communication with people. We've kind of estimated somewhere in that 3,000 acres are probably planted somewhere across northwestern Wisconsin. There's increased winter barley, again, as that potential crop regarding serving as a cover crop, but also letting that crop go to yield as far as having a potential second stream of income, or at least maybe it's another crop you can add to double crop with something on the back end. A lot of our information is also at the Cutting Edge podcast series. Stefan kind of handles that for us with our websites at the emergingcrops.org. I think I got that right, Stefan. I didn't pull it up directly here, but
emergingcropswi.org.
emergingcropswi.org. And then one thing that we've kind of worked towards, we haven't been able to really develop a economic development model or work on launching a small farm malt facility, but looking at this from a on-farm local ingredient type of product, is there an effort, or we think there's room there for launching some type of small farm malting facility. Probably would take some investment. I don't know, Carl, we've estimated about $50,000 to $100,000 probably to get a small on-farm one going, but something that farmers could deliver to a little bit more locally, be able to malt their barley and have it ready for the Wisconsin craft brew industry. So that's where we're working next. I guess we've worked on it all the time, keeping our ears and eyes open to see if there's potential out there for someone to start something like that. But I think that that opportunity is still there.
Jerry, if I could just make one more comment about that last point. Roar Malt has been amazing to work with. They bent over backwards to help us out, even funding some of the research that we've done. But the issue is their smallest batch is 180,000 pounds. And so that's a fair amount of risk for one farmer to take to put that many acres of barley in. It all has to be the same variety, et cetera. And so a smaller malt plant, you could reduce the risk. We'd have more farmers, I think, taking a chance if they could grow, 25 acres and take a chance on that, or 20 acres. And then we could try different varieties on a larger field scale, things like that. It's just to find the right combination of people to get together is what's kind of the holdback on that.
And before I go to the next slide, this picture over here on the right of Carl and I we were one of the nominees for Picture of the Year by the Country Today when this was taken in August of 2017, when they had their Picture of the Year from all the photographers and writers for the Country Today. This was the one selected by one of the writers. So we can still hang our hat on that one yet. That's why there's a little advertising over to the side here. I just snipped that off the website, but it's still out there if you want to read that article. So, and then to wrap up, just some acknowledgments. I've been at this for 10 years now or more, and just a lot of sponsorship and grant funding that we've been able to pull together that has made this project go. And we're continuing it this year. I know Carl is we're not doing as many sites down Buffalo County way, but we'll continue it here in Chippewa County to try to keep some of the winter barley and spring barley research and education moving forward. So with that, there's our contact info for me. I guess I forgot to put Carl's on there, but with that, I'll stop sharing and we can answer some questions.